Okay, so today we'll be reviewing, or, well, let's be honest, probably roasting my former 3MT video from 2021 back in my bachelor's degree. So let's get things started.
Microorganisms are frowned upon, especially in the current time. Yet we have been living with them in perfect symbiosis for thousands of years. Not only are they not harmful in certain situations, but they are beneficial. Let's take the example of our gut microbiota.
Okay, before we move forward, the one thing that I also took from Kenan Klakovic is one of the things you should invest in when doing these kinds of things is a mic. And I'm doing it without a mic right now anyway, so I'm not even listening to my own advice 5 years down the road. But you can hear the echoing. I should have done some vocal isolation here just in the editing part. The second thing I want to point out is I'm not sure what I was doing with my hands constantly. I was trying to be, well, somewhat animated, but then it felt like I'm pumping it up. But anyways, let's go on and see. The intro, I'm somewhat happy with to this day, so let's continue.
The microorganisms living in our large intestine, which is the last part of our gastrointestinal tract. About 100 trillion microorganisms from 1,000 different species live there. Anything from bacteria, protozoa, archaea, viruses, fungi, and others.
Yeah, I like still the numbers, so it gives a bit of context, but nobody knows what archaea is. If I just said, well, funguses, or if I said just um, basically mushrooms, that would have been also better. Just having a bit of a more approachable language, more appropriate to layman's audience here, because that's the whole point of the 3MT. But overall, okay.
In total, they add up to about 2 kilos and 3 million genes.
I do still like this. 2 kg is something you can kind of relate to. 3 million genes is also something that you can kind of imagine. What I should have done on top of this is to give an approximation of, let's say, the number of genes in our body or the rest of the human genome. So, how many genes a human has in total versus how many genes there are in just the gut, just to kind of give some analogies as well.
A third of our gut profile is shared between you, me, and other human beings. Yet 2/3 are unique, and we can look at it as a sort of gut fingerprint. Many different factors can influence the gut in a positive or negative way, including but not limited to stress, pregnancy, way of birth, epigenetic and genetic factors, age, nutrition, and lastly, exercise.
That's good, but once again, epigenetic might not be clear to most people, and also this is just listing way too many factors. I should have just said many factors, and also have the graphic there, so that should have been enough. Also, just to briefly touch on the graphic, it was one of the critique points, if I remember correctly, and looking back at it, it makes little to no sense and doesn't really add to anything. It just pretty much is a bit confusing. It gives the exact same thing I already said, so it isn't adding, it's just kind of repeating and competing for the same attention span as myself.
This is where I come in. I set out to answer the question, does endurance exercise have an impact on the gut microbiota?
Now, looking at the time, it's at the 1 minute 20. All of this was just introduction, and now I have about half the time left to actually get to some conclusions or get some results. Once again, with more experience nowadays, I would have structured it differently. I would have probably started with the most interesting fact about this, maybe my findings, or maybe something unexpected, and then worked my way back rather than going the traditional route where I just go down the route of building it up like a paper. Introduction, then methods, then so on and so forth.
If so, are there any intensity and age-dependent differences? And lastly, could endurance exercise be used as an active aging tool in regards to the age-associated dysbiosis?
Solid, but once again, the hands are just going up and down, up and down. Pump it up, bump up the jam. No, I have no clue what I was doing there. And also, the shirt is just too tight, let's be honest. I still had long hair, though, which is kind of interesting because in the middle of it, a lot of things happened, but that's off the. Let's go.
After After identifying the first publication of this sort from 2008, conducted by Matsumoto and his colleagues, a systematic search of the platform PubMed was conducted. 81 search term combinations were used, which yielded 1,615 initial results. 111 papers met the inclusion criteria. After carefully evaluating these papers and summarizing them, I can tell you this.
Yeah, well, this is technically correct. Systematic search doesn't say much to the average person. 81 search term combinations, same there. Carefully, or whatever I said there, carefully dissected or carefully analyzed. What exactly? This could have been a lot simpler, where I could have said around, let's say, 80 papers were identified, or around 80 sources, and these are the findings. So, yeah.
Yes, endurance exercise does have an impact on the gut microbiota, mainly in two ways.
Now, this I like. It's, yes, straight up, simple, everyone can understand that, and then there's two ways, and then let's see how I break it down further.
Through a decrease in the bacteroides to firmicutes ratio, which is a good thing, because from prior research we know that an increased ratio of these two phylum are associated with a higher risk of obesity.
Yeah, Bacteroides firmicutes, or Bacteroides firmicutes, which is, I think, the correct way to enunciate that. To this day, I know what they are, but I'm not that much into microbiota nowadays. But does the average person know what that is? Also, does that tell anything? I should have kept it much more simple than this. But anyways, let's go on.
And secondly, through the increase of two very specific species, Coprococcus and Faecalibacterium. It's been hypothesized that they are variables in athletic performance due to them being able to increase the energy yield of non-digestible carbohydrates.
Once again, yes, increased energy yield. Everything's technically correct. Don't get me wrong on that, but I should have just said, oh, there's these two specific bacteria or these two specific species that make you perform better while you're doing exercise. That would have been enough, conducted or conveyed the same message, and would have been a lot easier to understand.
When it comes to intensity-dependent differences, there are some.
When it comes to intensity-dependent differences, there are some. This is just bad wording on my end, and I do remember this and thinking I should have changed this. But if I'm being completely honest, this was like my 12th take, and I was just getting fed up with it, so let it slide.
Intensity goes up, the benefits go down.
Now, this is one of the very few good guess equations. So one goes up, one goes down. I still would have done that to this day.
There is not sufficient data to conclude on age-dependent differences, and therefore I cannot certainly say that it can be used as an active aging tool. But given the low risks and the huge potential upsides, we have nothing to lose if we try to implement it.
And we get to the end, and something I also critique nowadays, and something I personally very dislike about presentations, is when they end on a somewhat of a cliffhanger. Yes, there is a semi-concrete conclusion here, but I should have posed either a future question or proposed something new that could have been done to improve this, or had a much better concrete, kind of palpable, if you will, conclusion than this. Yes, it can be recommended because it can't do no harm. But anyways, that was back in 2021 when I did everything as part of my bachelor's degree. So this was my bachelor thesis, and as you can tell, I was even very critical at the time, but now even worse. And this is one of the very few times that I actually watched this video because I generally dislike watching myself on camera. But one thing I would want to point out is I would say objectively I improved, and this was the turning point and the reason I did. So thanks for the 3MT, thanks for the BHFF for giving me this opportunity and keeping this format. And yeah, I learned a lot, I improved a lot, realized how important communication is. And for anyone else competing out there, your first video or your first 3MT attempt might not be perfect, but it's still better than not trying at all.